Well, thank you so very much, and what a joy and a blessing to be here. You can sit down. You worried me. I thought you were all leaving. I thought, my goodness, I haven't even gotten started yet, and you're going already. Well, this is a delight, and I want to say to Brother Cerullo how much I'm honored to be here today. Now, the difference between what I've been doing on television for 6.5 years and what he does is that, yes, there was someone always in the studio who kind of prompted the audience to applaud, because otherwise I wouldn't have ever gotten any. Brother Cerullo doesn't have to have anyone prompting because it comes naturally and spontaneously from the people who hear him. What a great spirit in this room today. And during the music, I was just blessed. I was thinking, wow, what a great atmosphere it is to be in here. When I saw, I was thinking, should have had a bass player. Yeah. Too late now, brother. It's the oldest trick in the world. Pretend that you wished I had brought my guitar. But the fact is, as I just saw the joy that I saw in your life, my thought was that I'm not worried that any of you might not make it to heaven. I am a little concerned that you're going to be so pumped up about it that you may run past it and have to turn around and get back to it. Which is okay. Brother Cerullo mentioned the book, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy, that I'll be signing. And by the way, he is not kidding when he says that it's brand new. I, until today, had not received a copy of the hardback edition. All I've seen are the galley proofs that an author gets. So you're going to get it the same day I do. How about that? Now, I want to tell you, I'm not going to talk about the book other than to explain that the title may throw you off just a little bit, because you hear the title, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. What is it, a recipe book? A book on hunting? And then tells you how to cook the things that you shot? No. It is a phrase that I sometimes use when I talk about the great disconnect in America between the bubbles of influence in New York, Washington, and Hollywood, which sets the table for the culture of America. And in those three bubbles, the culture of fashion, finance, government, politics, music, entertainment, even sports, is pretty much established. And the lifestyle, the values, the culture that emanates in those three bubbles is very, very different than the lifestyle and the value system that many of us live in if we live in the land of what I call God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. It's a descriptive term really for flyover country, for middle America. For those of us who live in a place where it is not really all that strange to go to church. It is not weird to believe that we owe a dime of every dollar to God and that we faithfully and joyfully pay it to God. That it is not weird to think that we have a responsibility to protect our families and preserve our freedom. That it is not strange that when we see a funeral procession coming near us, that we would pull over to the side and respectfully wait until the funeral procession comes by. And that we would grow up saying please and thank you and yes sir and no sir and yes ma'am and no ma'am. That those are not things that make us strange. I've often said there's a big difference between people who are well educated and people who are smart. I know some people who are very well educated, they're not very smart. And I know some people who are very smart that aren't that well educated. And my point in the book is to say that if I'm out on a country road in the middle of the night and my car breaks down, I'd much rather have pulling up behind me a couple of good old boys in a pickup truck than I had a Harvard MBA in a Mercedes who, if he didn't have a cell phone signal, wouldn't be able to help me one iota. Give me the good old boys that know how to put the jack up under the truck, fix the tire, and get me going again. Now, what am I wanting to say is that there is a disconnect in this country because in many ways, we are a very different people than we once were in America because of a simple thing. We have lost our landmarks. You ever been to a place that you had been years before and you thought you knew the community? And things changed so much, you got lost in a place you thought was familiar to you. On March the 1st of 1997, I got a call at the governor's mansion. I was told that there had been a terrible tornado that had ripped through the community of Arkadelphia, Arkansas, about an hour south of Little Rock. I got calls like that regularly when I was governor. This one affected me for two very important reasons. One, my son was in school at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkadelphia at that time, the very school from which I had graduated. So naturally I was concerned about, was he okay? But I had lived there, and my wife and I, when we married, it was the first place we ever lived in. We lived in a little duplex. We paid $40 a month for that duplex apartment, and we paid way too much for what we got at $40 a month. But it was our first home. And I was still a college student there, and I had a lot of friends still there. And so when I got the word that a devastating tornado had just torn through Arkadelphia, it was not long before I was on my way there. And I went there, 2 days later, President Clinton came in. We flew in Marine One, went to the community, for me the second time, for him the first, as we walked through those neighborhoods. And I'll never forget, downtown Arkadelphia was pretty much leveled, destroyed from the foundation down. Buildings that had been there for almost 100 years were obliterated, not damaged, obliterated. And as I stood at the corner in downtown Arkadelphia, a small little town of about 10,000 people, I looked in all directions. I knew that city. I'd been there many times. I had lived there. But I could not get my bearings because all the landmarks, all the things that I normally would have associated with it, that's north, that's south, that's east, that's west, everything that I would have used as a bearing point, all of those navigation points were gone. That's what happens when we lose our landmarks. We're lost, we're confused. I tell you today that America is lost. It's confused. There is a disorientation in this country and in this world today. I realize that people are here from 66 nations on the planet, and I welcome you. I told Dr. Cerullo, I think there are more countries represented in this room than there are at the United Nations, and I'm pretty sure that what you're doing here is a whole lot more valuable to the future of planet Earth than what they ever do. But the reason that we have lost our way is because we've lost our landmarks by which we navigate. And you see, the landmarks that were the foundation of this country and of civilization start with the Word of the living God. There was a time in this country when it was not unacceptable. In fact, it was completely normal to believe that we embraced the Bible as the ultimate authority for the way that we lived. The Declaration of Independence upon which this country was built says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not accidental. Our founders unapologetically believed that They were, in fact, creating a nation that only could survive if it had the providence of God, and it did. Have you ever thought about how absolutely improbable it is that there ever was a country like ours? Think about it for a moment. A bunch of farmers and merchants, yes, even pastors, took the muskets off their mantles that were better suited for hunting rabbits and squirrels, and took on the British Army, the best equipped, the best trained, the best financed, even the best dressed and best fed army in the world at that time. And there is no way on earth that ragtag bunch of early patriots should have ever been able to successfully engage in a revolution against the power of the mother country. The fact that they did it is testament to the providence of God. And if you read the history of this country, there is no other explanation. There was a time when we believed that God moved upon people, and we trusted that the message of the Bible was the message that not only guided us spiritually, but it guided us morally. It guided us in our families. It guided us in our communities. And by the way, it wasn't that so long ago. My heavens, I remember as a kid, yes, we had Christmas pageants at school. Last year in Frisco, Texas, in the heart of the Bible Belt in this country, just outside of Dallas by 20 miles, the little town of Frisco, the school prohibited school children from wearing the colors of red and green together because they thought that somebody might associate that with Christmas, and that might be offensive to people who didn't love Jesus. I'm not making this up. As a kid, I remember we would have people come to our school and do assemblies and chapel services in a public school. And they would talk to us about Jesus. The Gideons would give us Bibles. And nobody got arrested. Nobody got sued. And by the way, nobody got hurt either. Because we were bringing Bibles to school, people weren't bringing guns to school, except for the deer hunters who left them in their trucks. We prayed at my school. We prayed the first thing every day. We said Pledge of Allegiance. We had a Bible reading. We had a prayer. And then we prayed again on the way to the cafeteria for lunch. Now, if you'd seen what they were serving in our cafeteria, you would have prayed too again. So what has happened to our culture? What's happened is that we've lost our landmarks. When we reject the Bible as the objective word of truth, when we say that the Bible is no longer the standard by which we live, and we make it whatever we feel, what we think, what we believe, then we have no landmark at all, because the landmark is always being moved to accommodate our lifestyle rather than make our lifestyle accommodate the Word of the living God and the power of the Holy Spirit. In the time of the judges, it was said that every man did what was right in his own eyes. By the way, it was not a good time in the world, because everybody made up his or her own rules. It's always a disaster when we do that. My oldest son is 38 years old. He lives in California now, but when my son was 12, we were one day before Christmas going to all go out and do some shopping. Now, my son didn't want to go. His younger brother, who was 8, and his sister, who was 6, really did not want him to go either, because he always picked on them every time they were together. And so we had a family vote, and we voted, and 5-0, one of the few unanimous votes our family ever had. We all voted that he would get to stay home, and we would all go out and do the shopping, and he would just stay there so we could have a peaceful outing. We were gone for a couple of hours. We came home and we walked in. My 12-year-old son met me at the door. He said, "Dad, hey, Dad, while you guys were gone, I did something for the family really nice." I said, really? What'd you do? Now, I was kind of shocked because my oldest son was really not given to or doing nice things for the rest of us always. And so I was so pleased, and I said, what did you do? He said, well, while you guys were gone, I made a cake. And Dad, I want you to have the first piece. Now, seriously, I was delighted because I thought, this is great. This time that we've been away, that he's been here by himself, he could have torn the house down, but what he did do, he used his time to do something unselfishly for us. I said, son, I would be thrilled. I'd like to have a piece of that cake. So he went over to the cake. He sliced a piece of the cake, put it on a little plate, brought it over to me with a fork. Now, while he's doing that, I'm saying to myself, reinforce his behavior by praising his actions and his attitude. Make sure that the first thing that comes out of your mouth is praise, an affirmation for what he has done. My son brings me the cake. I put the fork in it. I said, this looks good. And it did. I put the cake in my mouth, and the first thing out of my mouth was the cake. It was the worst tasting cake I'd ever imagined in my life. And my first thought was, my son is trying to kill me. I thought maybe he'd overheard his mother talk about life insurance I had. And he decided how well off the whole family could be if they could just get rid of me. That's when I started thinking like that guy. They asked him one time, how much life insurance have you got? He said, I don't have any, and I'm not going to get any. And when they asked him why, he said, because when I die, I want it to be a sad day for everybody. I was beginning to think that guy had it right. But then I looked into the face of my son and I saw this look of sheer shock. He was as surprised as I was that the cake could taste so bad. So I'm trying to recover. I've gone from wanting to praise him and affirm him and encourage him to now I've just insulted him. So I'm trying to recover, and I say, well, son, it really looked good. And I said, can I ask you something? Did you use a recipe? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, could I see that recipe? Yes, sir. So my son, whose name is John Mark, goes over, gets the recipe, brings it to me, and he hands it to me, and I look at it. It looks like a very normal recipe for a chocolate cake. And I said, now, John Mark, did you use this recipe? Yes, sir. Did you follow it? Yes, sir. Did you do everything it said, just like this? He said, yes, sir. Oh, now, Dad, there was one thing. Dad, there was a call in the recipe for a dash of salt. And I didn't know what they meant by a dash, so I figured that a cup would be enough. Honest mistake. Couple of cups of flour, cups of sugar, why not a cup of salt? Have you ever made a cake with a cup of salt? Don't. You won't eat it. Now, if you're a farmer and have cows, they will lick it for a few days, but other than that, there is no value in a cake made with a cup of salt. Now, I'm going to explain something to you. My son did not intend to make a bad cake. His motive was as pure as he'd ever had a motive before. My son was diligent. He worked hard at the cake. It was not a lack of effort, nor was it a lack of sincerity. He was absolutely sincere. But there was one problem. My son, not knowing the definition of a dash, made up his own. And the result, no matter how well-intentioned he was, no matter how hard he worked, no matter how sincere, the result was a disaster. When we, no matter how sincere we are, how hard we work, how wonderfully and purely motivated we are, when we take definitions and make them up because we have not referenced God's definition, the result is always a disaster. Always. And so when people say, well, why don't we just make marriage mean what we want it to mean? Why don't we just make life mean what we want it to mean? Everyone should do what he or she wishes to do. That sounds good. It sounds very tolerant. It sounds kind. There's only one problem. If there is something about which God has clearly spoken, then I have to ask myself, has God given me the permission and or the authority to edit His Word? And if He has not, then I only have one option. And that is to stand on His Word and believe it. If the whole world decides to be against me, so be it. But 100 years from now, I stand because I know His Word will not return void. This is not about your politics or mine. And by the way, you'll be happy to know I didn't come here to talk politics. If you hear me in some other settings, I just might. But not here today. Because that's not why you're here. And it's not why I'm here. But I believe that there is a sense in which when we lose the landmarks that guide us, we're lost and we're disoriented. Here's what Jesus said we were. This isn't what I said we were. And as much as I love and respect Dr. Cerullo, and I do, and his wife, I can't imagine 68 faithful years of serving Jesus Christ and being a faithful minister of the gospel of Christ. But I would say to you today, this is what Jesus said. He said about us, you are the salt of the earth. Remember that? Now, what did he mean by that? Well, a lot of people must think that because salt to us is a little seasoning that we put on our tables and we sprinkle just a little bit on our eggs or our steaks, that therefore salt is a seasoning. It just kind of spices things up a little bit, adds a little flavor. No. When Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, he was speaking in the first century. And he was talking to a bunch of fishermen up around the Sea of Galilee. As he was speaking, there is a very good likelihood, most likely, he was speaking and pointing out to some fishermen who were bringing in the fish that they had caught during the night. Now, in those days, they did not have the nice Yeti coolers that we have today. They didn't have ice. They didn't have refrigeration. They had salt. Salt was the preservative. So if you took a fish out of the water, you packed it in salt and that preserved it. Because as soon as that fish comes out of the water, what happens? It starts spoiling. The official word is putrefying. That's not a very pleasant word, but that's what happens. When something is out of its natural element in which it is protected in life, and you are trying to preserve it, if you don't preserve it, it putrefies, it spoils, it rots. I've often said about Baptists, when you pull a Baptist out of the water, he starts rotting right away. It's why so many of the Baptists will turn rotten real quickly. I can say that because I've been a Baptist most of my life. I'm not here to insult any of the Baptists. I'm just here to speak the truth. People have asked me sometime, am I one of those narrow-minded Baptists who think only Baptists go to heaven? Had a lady asked me that one time. I said, no, ma'am, I'm more narrow than that. I don't think all the Baptists are going to make it myself. Now, Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth. Here's what he means by that. If the world is rotting, if the culture is putrefying, if the things that you see around you, the institutions, whether they're the institutions of marriage or government, or the institutions of entertainment, or even the institutions of the church are rotting, and they're growing distant, and they're beginning to create a stench in the nostrils of God. Here's what he said: you are the salt of the earth. He means by that, if believers do not surround that culture and like salt preserve it, it will continue to rot and it will begin to infect everything around it. The landmarks of biblical truth are that those of us to whom God has entrusted his word are the salt of the earth. It doesn't mean that we consider in a prideful way a sense of superiority. It means that in a humble, gracious way, we recognize that we have a role of servanthood to play to serve God by preserving that which is spoiling. We're the salt of the earth. Salt is not needed where things aren't spoiling. When I hear people say, you know, I don't want to get involved in anything that's not in the church. Well, I understand what you're saying, but brother, sister, hear me today. We don't need salt to preserve the meat that's in the freezer. We need the salt to preserve that which is spoiling. God has not called you to the easy places. He has called you to the hard places. He has not invited you to go where everyone else thinks and lives like you. He has called you to go to the far ends of the earth and to bring Jesus to those who have never heard his name. And he said, you are the light of the world. The light of the world. Last week, all 4 of our grandchildren were at our house. It was louder than all 4 engines of a 747 at full throttle. 4 toddlers under the age of 4. Wow. Have you ever stepped on a toy in the dark that you didn't think was there? I love playing with Legos. I hate stepping on them barefoot. When that happens, you say, boy, next time I walk through that room, I'm going to turn the lights on. I don't care who it wakes up. I'm not walking through the darkness anymore. Because when you walk through darkness, what happens? You stumble, you fall. You can't see your way. And so Jesus said, you are the light of the world. You know what he was saying? If the world is stumbling, falling, bumping into things, light it up. Light it up. Because the only way the world will stop falling and stumbling is for his light to turn on. And his light is not the people who have the most extraordinary degrees from the finest Ivy League schools. His light comes from that person who from their knees hears God and stands up and says, I will be what God wants me to be. You don't have to have a PhD to be the light of the world. You just have to love Jesus to be the light of the world. When I was not quite 16 years old, there was an extraordinary event in Dallas, Texas, called Explo 72. It was in June of 1972. Campus Crusade for Christ sponsored what would later be described, I think pretty accurately, as a Christian Woodstock. 100,000 young believers from all over the world gathering in Dallas, Texas for a week of prayer, praise, and evangelism. And a couple of my friends and I from high school went to Dallas, Texas to be part of what would be for me a life-changing experience. I had grown up going to Sunday school in my little town where I grew up. The only thing really more unacceptable than not going to Sunday school would be to go and to really believe everything and live like you've been to Sunday school. But everybody went to church. But church, for the most part, was get saved, go to church, go to heaven. Nothing so much about a disciple life, a holy life, a life of consecration. It was just get saved, go to church, go to heaven, hang on for dear life. Whether you had joy or not. And sometimes we would sing those hymns. I have the joy, joy, joy down in my heart. You know the drill. At 15, God did something special in my life. I'd come to Jesus as a 10-year-old kid in a vacation Bible school. But I didn't know that there was much more until I was 15. When I was at Expo 72, something amazing happened because suddenly I was surrounded by 100,000 young Christians from all over the world who were gathered in Dallas, Texas with a single mission. Let's change the world. Let's change the world. We saw our world being changed by people who wanted to burn it all down. That's back in the days when there was such a movement on college and other campuses across the nation to rebel, to protest, to express anger and hostility against every institution, the government, the family, everything, the church. Here we were, 100,000 young Christians, and we were being taught that we could change the world. Every night we met in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas, all 100,000 of us. On the final evening, Friday night, Dr. Billy Graham was invited to preach. He spoke that night on the power of each life. Now, I was just a kid, and I was sitting so far away that I was in what might be called the nosebleed section of the Cotton Bowl. It was so far high up in the air and far, far from where the platform was on which Dr. Graham spoke. But I remember his message so vividly that night, and the power of the message as he talked about how each one of us could be the light of the world. And here's what he told us. The darker things get, the more even a little light makes a difference. You know, maybe you're here today and your excuse is, I'm not that qualified. I don't know that much. I'm not important. I'm not rich. I'm not influential. But guess what? If you know Jesus, you have light. And in a dark world, even a little bit of light is powerful against the darkness. In this world where darkness prevails and where sin reigns, a little bit of light makes a difference. Now, to illustrate that, all the lights of the Cotton Bowl were turned off on that Friday night. It was pitch dark. As we had come in, we'd all been handed a little candle. And from the stage, with the lights completely off in the Cotton Bowl, it totally dark, Billy Graham lit his candle on the stage. He passed his candle to Dr. Bill Bright, the head of Campus Crusade for Christ, who then turned to two other people, and the 2 candles became 4. They turned to others. The 4 became 8, 16, then to 32 and 64. And it was amazing. In just a matter of minutes, as people took their candle and lit the candles of the people around them, the Cotton Bowl began to become illuminated. And it didn't take but a few minutes, and the entire Cotton Bowl was filled with 100,000 candles, so illuminating the skyline that people living around the Cotton Bowl were calling the Dallas Fire Department and saying, the Cotton Bowl is on fire. And brother, it was on fire that night. It was. And as much as I will remember the powerful orange glow of the flames of 100,000 candles, what I remember even as vividly is the power of the one little candle that started it all on that stage. As far away as I was, I could see that little candle flickering because a little bit of light overwhelms the darkness. I tell you, do not let your spirit be discouraged. Do not let your heart be broken and say, we are overwhelmed with sin in this world. We are overwhelmed with darkness in this world. Oh, it appears that we are losing the battles of culture. It appears that we are becoming less significant and less influential. Let's stop whining and start shining. Folks, we have the light of the gospel of Christ in our hearts. Why aren't we shining? I leave you with this reminder. I'm a person who kind of likes to know what's going to happen if I can know. I just want to. If there is a ball game on, I sometimes will tape it and I will watch it later. And here's why. Number one, to zap through the commercials. You can watch a 3.5-hour football game in 2 hours or less. Second reason, because if it's a team I really care about, I don't want to watch them lose, be honest with you. I want to watch them win. So I tape the game, and then I find out, did they win or lose? Because if they lost, I erase the tape. I don't care. I'm not wasting 2.5 hours of my life watching something that depresses me. But if they win, I pop some popcorn, I sit back in my chair, and when it's late in the fourth quarter and my team is behind by 2 touchdowns, I look around and say, don't y'all worry, we're going to come back and we're going to win this thing. Now, I want to tell you something. In case you're discouraged and depressed and deflated and defeated, get over it, because I've read the back of the book, my friend, and we win. We win. God bless you.